Kelly, you are one of the longest serving executives at Caldwell and a leader of our Canadian and global board and CEO practice. I know you've seen a lot of change in governance practices over the past decade and hoped you might be willing to share some of your insight about some of the topics on everyone's mind in governance.
Well, Jay, I'm certainly happy to discuss what you think will be useful to our clients on the topic of governance. It certainly has been a very interesting decade in terms of the change in governance, and I don't think we've ever seen such a more rigorous or intense time for boards and governance. Everything to do with things like cybersecurity and risk management, all the way to transformational change in organizations, whether it's machine learning and artificial intelligence, etc. Boards have never been under so much pressure to really respond to the shareholders' demands.
Well, those are certainly big issues, but maybe something a little less threatening to the enterprise is top of mind with the boardroom today. We have seen an increasing trend for mandating diversity of all types, but most broadly for the percentage of board seats that must be occupied by women over time in various jurisdictions. Can you give us a quick overview of how that developed in Ontario and Canada more broadly, where this was an early adopted practice, Kelly?
What really stands out is how we got there in Ontario and in Canada more broadly. Some of our leading pension funds and major financial institutions with broad holdings and reach really started to see the need to modernize the boardroom and the governance practices, which included developing deeper benches of diverse candidates that could serve on boards. So following this, we started to see some activism on the part of institutional shareholders with provincial governments to create requirements in order to speed up the process. You can argue about this process and whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, but it happened and we all had to adjust to it.
Okay, so it didn't start with government intervention, but wound up with mandates and timelines in Ontario. What was the timeline and goals set specifically in the province to increase the percentage of board seats for women to serve on company boards?
Well, let's get specific on Ontario. So in 2016, our Premier, Wynne, announced the following gender diversity targets. She really got behind this, and that really was quite a movement for our country. By 2019, women are and were able to make up at least 40% of all appointments to every provincial board and agency. The businesses were to set a target by the end of 2017 to appoint 30% of women to their boards and achieve this target within 3 to 5 years. In fact, corporate Canada and the major CEOs of our largest companies got behind this initiative and created the 30% Club. The private sector also needed to step up their efforts. So 91% of TSX listed issuers are below the 30% target for women on their boards. 14% of TSX listed issuer board members are women. And 35% of provincial agency boards are below that 40% target. So while our aspirations are good, we're not quite hitting the mark, even in Ontario or Canada.
Well, that's a daunting task for sure, with just normal board recruitment processes and turnover. What are some of the insights from the past 3 years since this initiative was launched in Ontario regarding diversity in the boardroom?
Well, first I think we maybe should have approached this in a bit of a different way, but that's hindsight. I think by suggesting targets in terms of percentages of new appointments, maybe that was a bit of a miss, because that caused accelerating or forcing turnover of really good high-performing board members. Secondly, Jay, I think we need to do a better job of activating potential female board members and preparing them for service. Unlike their male counterparts, they, in many cases, it's their first board role, and the role of the board versus the role of an executive is very, very different. And then thirdly, I think we need to talk to the actual board and governance chairs in advance about what the technical or role needs were. There was a lot of panic initially about just finding the best qualified women and generically, and that didn't particularly serve the board very well. As an example, radically different need for qualified financial expert for an insurance company or an operator for an energy utility is very, very different And let's be honest, no one really wants to feel like they're on a board just because of one aspect of their background, particularly if it's gender or race. It's kind of insulting when you really think about it.
Wow, that's pretty hard hitting, Kelly, and I appreciate you sharing that insight. It does bring to mind a concern I have and hope you can address it. Do you see a shortage of qualified men and women, both, for board service today? And what obligation do you think companies have to prepare their next level leaders for board service, both internally and on external boards?
I'm glad you asked that question the way you did, Jay, because it's a holistic problem. Boards are way down with so much more, and the rate of change is much faster than it has been, almost a Moore's Law type of effect. Yes, I think we do have a real shortage of qualified board members generally, and because of three very practical reasons. Regardless of gender or race, today's sitting C-level executives are almost constrained to serving on one outside board, at the best two, if any, if they're allowed to do any boards. When I started in the boardroom, it wasn't uncommon to see a sitting CEO or CFO serve on 3 or 4 outside boards. Moving down to one, maybe even 2 or none, almost 50% from the onset are cut out. So the magnitude of these issues facing the board in a technology supercharged and globally, economically, and more complex environment has really created a real dilemma in the boardroom. Do we add position players' expertise in areas such as cybersecurity, sustainability, artificial intelligence, CSR, or do we leverage experts for that and add cost? So if you've got a board that is built for speed and decision making, adding 2 to 3 seats can radically alter the board culture, and experts who don't have more board background can be a liability in 60 to 70% of the board conversation and remit. Also, executive turnover in the C-suite continues to accelerate, and the average CEO tenure of more than 7 years, 10 years ago, is just over 4 today. So that means the board has to spend a lot more time on succession planning, and gender plays a role in that for sure. The next generation of women will be much better positioned if we are good stewards of the talent in the decade ahead.
Those are great points, and we are starting to see this unfold in California-based companies now, where the first mandates on female composition in the boardroom are being enacted. What advice would you have for female board candidates being considered in California and elsewhere in these evolving mandates?
Well, I think first do a sanity check. If you're being considered for a board, ask yourself, other than being a woman, why am I being considered? And if you don't see the functional reason by domain or market expertise, it's probably not a great fit. And it's a lot easier to join a board than it is to leave one. Secondly, would you enjoy it? And will you learn from it? And what are you giving and what are you getting out of it? And finally, can you see yourself doing this for 3 to 6 years? If not, don't do a disservice to the board and accept an invitation to join. There'll be lots of opportunities for women in the next 5 years, so don't necessarily jump at the first opportunity if it's a fit. The other thing to think about is that boards are doing a lot more performance management on a board. So you don't want to be on that board if you're not contributing. You don't want to be that person that's not at the table. And another thought is sometimes women are so anxious to get on a board, they maybe don't evaluate the board opportunity right. So on one hand, don't sell yourself short if you're being considered for a board that maybe you have the opportunity to contribute more, bigger board, larger company. But also, don't also have more of an expectation of what you can do in the boardroom versus the opportunity, because that's a miss sometimes too.
Sage advice, Kelly, and I'd say these 3 points apply to every board candidate and governance committee making a board decision. I know this isn't the easiest topic and really appreciate you being so thoughtful about it today.